do the work on ourselves with the Lord, where we start to remove the Legos and go back to our original build. Because it's so powerful when we're able to step into who we were created to be and actually love that person, right? Yeah? All right. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of that. So what I want to share with you today, and I felt like the Lord was like, I really want you to talk about where there are those places in our life where we might get entrapped, snared, whatever it is. There's like these little loopholes, right? And we know, I think most of us, that the battlefield is really in our mind. It's not traditionally outside of us. There's some of that. But we really don't need to go looking very much further than right between our two ears to really receive a battle on our own. So it's at that mindset level that really is the challenge. And so I thought today would be a great day to share with you some stories and information around a particular character in the Bible that I love so much. Her name is Miriam. Does everyone know who Miriam is?
Yes.
Okay. So Miriam is one of the 7 prophetesses in the Old Testament, right? And she was Moses' sister. And she has a really cool backstory. I don't know, do any of you like dabble in the Hebrew or any of the Jewish books, the Midrash, any of that?
No.
No? Okay, so this will be hopefully some interesting news to you. So Miriam was a prophet from the very beginning. She was 5 years old when Moses was born, okay? And she actually had a little bit of a situation on her hands because of how much she loved family. That was really her passion, was babies and family, and she loved that. And we see that in the book of Exodus. She was in charge of taking care of families, the well, all of that has to do with her. And in this series of like who she is and who she becomes is really interesting because she comes to this place where her name means bitterness. So she is born at the height of bitterness in Egypt. So it is the most emotional, abuse. It's the most physical abuse that's going on when she's born. So she's born into bitterness, right? And that is literally her circumstance. And it's in this place where she starts to actually flourish, which, I don't know, how many of you typically flourish in bitterness? Not really, right? We try to run from it. We try to suppress it. Let's just not be bitter. And a couple of things that you should know about her is that she was, I want to say, about 4 years old when everything was going on in Egypt. I don't know if you guys know kind of what the abuse looked like back then, but they would actually take their children, the Egyptians would take the Jews' children, and they would bury them alive when they were building walls and bridges. And so her father happened to be very prominent in the Jewish community. He might have been some kind of a rabbi leader. And so he got all of the men together and he said to them, we shouldn't do this in vain anymore. We're just having children to hand them over to be slaves or abused or killed. And so he decided amongst all of the different council members that they should divorce their wives. And so they all decided to divorce their wives. So this is Jewish history. This is what they know to be true. And so he divorces the wives, and Miriam is the one who stands up, and she says, you can't do this. If you do this, you're no better than Pharaoh. Yeah, the decree has come down from Pharaoh that they're going to give away our sons and we have to give up our children. But now you've destined those of us that are family members, wives, to a life of nothing, right? And so then at the same time she says, and oh, by the way, you can't do this because mom is going to have a son that's going to save the Jews. So she prophesied that before Moses was even born. So in that place, he says, that's a really good point. She has. So he goes back and they decide to remarry their wives. So they remarry their wives, and that is when Moses was conceived. So at a very early age, she was obedient. She was faithful. She was really good at looking for proof, which I love. We're not really that good at that sometimes. So that's why she was by the river waiting to see if Moses was going to be saved. Because she had prophesied that there would be a son that was born that was going to be saved. She was standing there watching and seeing, right? And so that's something for, forward when we get to that part. I want us to be people that are looking for the proof in our lives. Not just fruit, but the proof that things have actually changed, okay? So here we go. probably gonna need my glasses for this, so bear with me. So she's born into it, and the story of Miriam is, I don't know how much you guys know about her, I just love her so much. Thinking about what it was like in the Exodus when they get to leave, right? They're leaving at night. They don't have any time to raise the bread? It was unleavened bread, right? Mm-hmm. So they pack everything on them, whatever they can carry. They're going around and taking from the Egyptians because God said, go ahead and do that. So they're taking whatever they can, but they have no time to bake their bread, which is kind of a big deal in the Jewish culture. Like, there's a lot that revolves around food for them. So that was kind of like a little bit of a sacrifice. But what does Miriam decide to bring? And it shows up in Exodus 15, chapter 20, or verse 20. Do you guys know? What does she bring? A tambourine. Are you kidding me? Like, you're running away from being a captive, but you're not going to forget your tambourine. You're going to leave food behind. You're not going to spend time making food, but you're going to bring your tambourine. She brought her tambourine because she was waiting in anticipation of how good God is. She was always waiting in anticipation of who God is, right? Not the situation, not the bitterness right at her front door, right? She was born in a time of bitterness. She was drinking the cup of bitterness, but yet she chose to step into a place of thanksgiving, right? And so in Exodus, in Exodus, she decides to bring the tambourine, and from that place, when they get across the sea, from the Egyptians, and they're delivered from the slavery, she pulls out the tambourine, leads all of the women in a song and a praise towards God, which reminded me so much of the song that you sang, where our God is an awesome God. When it talks about it in the Bible, it's not a very long song, and it had even the same rhythm. Have you ever heard like the rabbis sing? It's very like tribal almost, and it was really cool. So that's something that I want to share with you there, is that when we stand in a place of thankfulness, we start to find insulation from the things around us. And it's not only an insulator, but it's also something that will keep contaminants away from us. Okay, I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So if you take it into the New Testament context, right, it says in the Bible, it's 1 Timothy 4, 3 through 5, he talks about praying over your food. So don't be afraid to eat the food that was given to the idols and the demons. Just pray over it in thanksgiving, because it actually decontaminates the thing that which is there set against you. So remind yourselves, as when you get into places in your life, that it's a place of thanksgiving that will insulate you and also decontaminate the situation. All right, so that's Miriam, right? So she's there. She rebels against the bitterness of life, and she decides that she's going to swallow the bitterness. Okay, she's not going to allow it to overcome her. She chooses thanksgiving, and that's so much of what I do in my professional life, but also in the day-to-day. Is the freedom is so. Peace is a person, right? Jesus. But freedom is our choice. It's in our decision making where we get freedom. All right. So in that place, the people are grumbling, right? So they've been delivered. They're there now, and they need water. It's been 3 days, and they're upset because they don't have the water that they need. So Moses does what he does. They get to the springs of Miriam, I think is how you say it. And in this place, they taste the water, and it's completely bitter, which is actually true. It was bitter. And so a lot of the waters in that region had a lot of minerals in it. And the minerals, the water looked amazing at the look of it, but then when you actually went to taste it, it actually was really oily and just really strange. It tasted very bitter. So they were complaining. Of course, God did a miracle and changed the water for them. But this is what I want to submit to you, is that in Exodus 15, 22 through 26, it says at first glance it's a story of people that are thirsty who grumble for water and then grumble because the water in the spring is bitter. And it's suggested that in this place there's a deeper story. because when God decided to bring them to this spring, he says to them, well, he says to Moses, he talks to Moses, and he shares with him that what he really wanted to do was he wanted to take Egypt out of the people. And so what they perceived to be bitter was actually for them. So these minerals and this calcium deposit that was in the water was intended to turn their intestines and actually purge them of the parasites and all of the different things that they had received when they were enslaved and in captivity. But they lost out on that blessing because of the grumbling, right? So he changed the water. They cut down the tree that the sap changed the chemical balance of the water, and now the water didn't taste bitter anymore. But I really feel like that's a word for us, that there's going to be places in our life where things feel bitter, right? And we could decide that it's for us instead of happening to us.
Yes.
Right? Always a little challenging in the moment. I love you. You're like my cheerleader. She's like, yes. So there we are, right? So we have these places in our life. Let me get back to my notes here. So from a place of emotions, right? We have them, we experience them. God has emotions, and I really felt like the Lord was saying to me, he's like, I want you to share that, you might not say to yourself, well, I really struggle with bitterness, or whatever that case may be. All of the underlings of bitterness are things like anger, resentment, and any of those, right, are there. And what happens sometimes is we think that we're not experiencing these things because we just push it down, or we just decide to do something different and not think about it. And Ephesians 4 is an area that he really wanted me to address, which is all around how to be angry but not sin. Right? And so as Christians, sometimes we really have a hard time with just the emotion anger. We're like, we shouldn't be feeling this, like something has gone wrong, right? And that's not true. It's, who told you that? Who told you that something's going wrong because you're feeling angry? It's what you do with the anger that really makes the difference. Because remember, it's all around your decision making and your choice, just like Miriam. Did you want to say something?
No, it's a choice. And when you say choice, I mean
It's a choice. That's right. So in Ephesians 4:26, it says, be angry but don't sin, and don't let the sun go down in your anger. So when Paul is talking to the readers in Ephesus, he's talking about how do we deal with this? How do we actually allow the emotion anger? Because what we really need to do is we need to allow the emotions that we feel so that we can actually move them into the right place. So we can't, if we're in a place of resistance, it gets to stay. So whatever resists persists. Whatever we allow and process through has to go. And then you get victory over that emotion. So in Ephesians 6, he talks about that there's this place where we can actually live and not let the sun go down on an anger, and we don't have to sin. So part of that is, do you guys remember the Lord's Prayer? Yes. Right? And it talks about how, forgive our sins and our debts and our debtors, right? Mm-hmm. So the really beautiful piece of that is that in that prayer, we're already deciding to forgive before it's even happened. So living a lifestyle of pre-forgiveness is actually available to us. And it was so important that it was in the one prayer that Jesus taught the disciples to pray. So remembering that, again, it's choice, and we can do it right up front every day, every morning. And we can choose, the way I say it is we can choose to not be controlled by the sin of another person, which I think is really powerful. And there's I'll just leave it at that. Okay. So we can choose to be not controlled by another person, and that's traditionally kind of how our emotions work, is that when we're not aware of what's going on inside, or we're trying to resist it, we don't actually then have the authority over them. So we get a little kooky, right? And so the next thing I want to bring your attention to is Miriam again, right? So she has lived this faithful life. She's a prophetess from the time of like 3 or 4 years old. She is the first person to pull out her tambourine and celebrate in anticipation what God was going to do. She always knew he was going to do it. They're all grumbling, right? And then we see her a little later on, and she gets leprosy. You guys remember that? Yeah. She gets leprosy. And she gets leprosy because she's having a problem with a decision that Moses made. You guys remember this? Yeah. So Moses has decided that that he needs to be separated. So it's when the tent of meetings happened and the elders were separated. And he decides that he needs to be set apart and basically sanctified. So no relations with his wife. Right? So Miriam has a huge problem with this because her affections are towards families and children. So to her, this is exactly what happened when her dad made that decision to divorce the wives, right? And set apart the families and change the dynamic. And procreation is a really big deal in the Jewish culture. So this to her was a problem. So she was going to take it into her own hands and talk about it. And when she started to speak out, the Lord didn't like that. He really had a problem with that. Let's see, what did she say? She said, so this is Numbers 12:22. Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? This suggests that she's disgusted with what she sees as Moses' self-appointed abstinence to mark him as the chosen, most important prophet of the Lord. Now, recognize that all along the way, he has been not the only one, but he's hearing from God. There's no mistake about it, right? He literally is the chosen leader for the people. But because of her past and the challenges that she had with her father, his name is Aram, she then is reverting back to something that's in her past and reacting to that. So that got bubbled up, right? So when it happened in Egypt, when her dad made that decree that we're going to divorce, it started to bubble up again because she didn't take care of it. Right? And that's what it looks like when we resist the anger, the resentment, the unforgiveness, anything in our lives in that vein is it's going to bubble back up. And I want you to notice that the action of Moses separating from his wife wasn't against her. It was against his wife, right? And the family. And that's what I want to call to your attention. That's super important because sometimes we're really good at not taking offense when it's to us, but we actually have a really hard time when it happens to the people around us, our family members, the ministries that we serve. Right? When that's where we actually get caught. We think we've got our house clean, but we actually get caught because it's in that place of outside of us happening to others that we actually get offended. How many of us, I hear it all the time, people are speaking really poorly of our president and things like that, right? It's the same thing, right? You don't agree with the policy or what he does or whatever else, or you're helping out with foster kids and you can't believe the foster care system. That is what I'm talking about, right? That's the opposite of love, right? So we think we're clean if we're just not taking offense personally to us. Oh my. So we have to be able to be able to resist picking up offenses for the people and the ministries that we love and care for. The offenses will reveal the weakness and breaking points in our own lives. How many of you know that the past only exists in our mind?
Oh, it's over with, yeah.
It doesn't.
I believe that.
Yeah. The past doesn't exist anymore. It's only your thoughts about the past.
Yeah.
Because God is in the past, present, and future.
That's right. And so when we are in that place, when we're remembering the past, we're tied to yesterday. We can't be in the present, and we're actually no good for the kingdom. Right? And the challenge with that is that we can't bring redemptive solutions if we're still reeling from things in the past that we haven't dealt with. Right? Yeah. That's right. And so this is one of the I think really kind of profound points is that when we hold on to the past, we can't bring the redemptive solution. And the enemy doesn't care what your opinion is. So he doesn't care if you like the president or you don't like the president, if you like the foster care system or if you don't like it. But as long as you leave the character of Christ to defend it, he's perfectly happy. Right? So you want to really, that's the checking of yourself, right? When you're feeling an emotion, is are you leaving the character of Christ to defend it? Like, where are you in that place? So, so what do we do, right? So we know that in Ephesians it talks about, basically allow the emotion and don't allow yourself to sin. And then it also says to not let the sun go down on your sin. So those are some keys for us on how we want to move forward, really kind of putting our emotions and the things that happen to us in life in perspective.
I just want, before you go any further,
Yeah.
can I ask you, so how do we put the character of Christ in situations where we know, like, this is happening over here that I don't like, so how, give an example, because I think that will help us understand, how do we leave the character of Christ in something we're not really, that we know is wrong, and we don't like it, but we're, talking negative about it, and we're wrong, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I put together, if anyone's taking notes, just some questions that if I were you, meaning I'm receiving this information, I'm like, I don't really know how to do this. These are the things that I would walk through. So first is just identifying if there's any situations or people in your life that have caused any resentment or unforgiveness. And if you don't think you have any, all you have to do is go to places in your life where you've resisted or refused to let go of an old hurt or wound. You've resisted or refused to acknowledge what you did wrong. You've resisted to forgive others for what they did. You've resisted to stop judging others. Or maybe you've resisted or refused to admit they were wrong, you were wrong too in the situation, along with them. Or maybe you had a hard time saying, I'm sorry. Okay? And lastly, when you've either resisted or refused to lay down your rights for others. Okay? So that's going to give you an indication of whether or not these emotions, which eventually become strongholds, are actually there present in your life. And then in Psalms 4:4, David talks about, like, how do you do this? Like, how do you not let the sun go down on your anger? So I'm going to talk about that, and then maybe we can talk about So the first thing is being still. The second thing is you want to meditate on the situation. And I always, like, when I'm working with my kids, I always tell them, like, you have to think like a Jew. And they're like, oh, Mom, come on, because I just love the Jews. And part of what they do so well is they're not asking, why did this happen to me? In the same way we ask that question. They're asking, why did this happen to me? What's my role? Why are you showing me it? Why am I experiencing this? Because they know it's for them. They know there's a refining in there, not a punishment. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Right? So if that's the character of Christ, if that is the Father, if that is Adonai, who is a good father and a good parent, always wanting to prosper us and grow us, then of course he's going to sometimes give us bitter water. And it's not from him per se, but he's going to make sure that that bitter water is the thing that purifies you, that purges you from the decontaminants or the contaminants so that you are no longer contaminated. So it's in these places where we have to just step into it, swallow the bitter cup, and process it, and know that he's on the other side of it, and we're going to be completely purified if we do. When we run from it, it's a different story. We just get another opportunity later. So it's called a test. So next, you're going to ask, you're going to think like a Jew. You're going to ask, how is this for you? So you're going to remind yourself, this is not happening to me. That's just not even for us, right? That's victim. All right, so what's your role? And then lastly, you're going to look for a way for thankfulness. Okay? So just like Miriam, she could have just succumbed to the bitter situation. She was born at the height of bitter. We don't even know bitterness like that, right? We've never been enslaved. We've never been in a place where we don't have food, we don't have shelter, our children are being taken from us and killed, right? So, and no hope. Like there's just no end in sight, right? It's not even like a sentence maybe where you get, 10 years or more. So looking for that thankfulness and remembering that God will often put the two side by side. So in the Bible, when Moses was instructed to cut down the tree and throw it into the water to no longer make it bitter, he will have a duality right in front of you. And usually when we're struggling with bitterness or resentment, we are so blind to the good, to the thing we can be thankful for that's right in front of us. And that is historically what we see in that terrain, is that alongside all of these water places that aren't necessarily water that you would want to drink, there is always a corresponding tree next to it that actually becomes the neutralizer. But if we're not looking for that, if we don't understand that God already has the solution, then how are we going to neutralize these situations in our own lives? Right? So here we go. So the challenge is to create a new thought. Okay? Because everything comes from a thought. Thought and emotions are like twinsies. You can't have an emotion without a thought. You can't have a thought without an emotion. So the minute you find yourself experiencing an emotion that you're not in line with, you're like, this is really interesting. I'm experiencing jealousy right now. Okay? You want to process through what's the thought attached to that. Okay? Because you can pretty much guarantee that the thought attached to that doesn't line up with the word. It's probably more in line with scarcity mindset, poverty, and fear. And we want thoughts that are aligned with love and abundance, because that's where we get victory. When we step out in love, we always have victory. And love is always moving towards connection where the other is disconnect. So then you can also look at your actions and say, how am I acting right now? Do I just really just not want to be around that person? Oh, there we go. That's the father that I'm aligned with that I don't want to be aligned with, right? You just know, from your actions. So one of the points that I have here is, so we create what I call a new thought model. So what we want to do is we want to identify the thought and the emotion combo that we're dealing with right now. And then we want to create a new thought, because the enemy can't put a thought in there unless you don't have one, right? So we want to be proactive. We want to say, okay, that's what I'm thinking right now, so I'm going to rethink that, and I'm going to put a thought in there, because if I replace the thought that he's serving up to me, or my soul, or whatever, right, based on trauma, past experiences, typically that's the reason why we react and think the way we do, then he can't come in and try it and do anything else, because I'm proactively creating the new thought. So that's what we would do, is we would create that new thought. And sometimes it's really good to identify the emotion that you want to feel about the situation. So let's say instead of jealousy or bitterness or anger, you want to experience gratitude. So you're literally going to role play. You're going to put gratitude on, and you're going to say to yourself, okay, the circumstance is Susie sent the email. That's Susie. I don't know what it might be. Or my husband looked at me the wrong way when I was doing dishes. So that's your circumstance, right? And instead of having, like Susie, let's say, for example, instead of feeling jealousy, I want to feel gratitude. So if I'm putting on gratitude, then I have to force myself, it forces me to come up with a thought that matches gratitude. Oh, I'm really grateful that she took the time to share her thoughts. You might not like her thoughts. You might not agree with them, right? Wow, yeah, I'm a little jealous because she's got a lot of skills and gifts, and so I'm grateful that she's sharing them with other people instead of being jealous about the email that came out. Yeah.
That's good.
Oops.
Freedom. That's
Freedom.
Yeah.
That's right.
Choice freedom.
So Romans 12:18. You know, what do? We fight for peace. It says, do everything you can to be at peace with all men, stay undefiled by the spirit of bitterness or any other spirit of that nature. Recognizing that this is a test. Every time you come to a negative emotion, it's actually just a little mini test. And all of heaven is waiting to see what you're going to do. The cloud of witnesses are in there, the angels are there, and they're waiting to see how will you respond. I mean, literally, they're eavesdropping. They're like, oh, we know who she was created to be. We know her Lego, right, form, but is she going to be able to do this? And again, testing isn't a one-time thing, right? There's different levels of testing, and when you don't pass, you just get another opportunity. So it's so much better to sit and process, just like David in Psalms 4:4, really take a minute and meditate on the situation, realign your thoughts, because you actually get to tell yourself what to think. Your brain is just a computer and it runs the program. So you can either let it run its programming that you probably received before the age of 7, or you can tell it what to think. It's super powerful.
Be the boss of it.
You actually are. Most people don't know. They're like, what? I always like, it's funny, little things like I'll be working with people and they'll say, I'm just shy. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Who told you that? Now, you can prefer not to be the center of attention, but who told you you were shy? Like, because you preferred to just sit in the back and not be forward? Like, that equals shy? I don't know. Like, you don't have to be shy if you don't want to. But there's so many things that people will tell you what's going on with them as if they're facts. Because we've never questioned it. All right, so the first step was Marah with the people, the Israelites, was that they would actually simply obey, and that's part of what God had shared with them, was that if you keep my commandments, right, then these things, will be different for you. This is Exodus 15:16. Or 15:26, excuse me. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord, your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord who heals you. God was not only interested in healing or getting his people out of Egypt, but he wanted to get Egypt out of the people. And the key word in there is the commandments. So it's actually a command to not allow the sun go down on your anger, right? So it is actually a command that we would deal with our emotions in a powerful way, not let them deal with us. So just reminding yourselves that the healing is in the swallowing of the bitterness, not the resisting of it. There's so much more power when you swallow it, you get victory over it. That's right. So just, last but not least, God consistently wants to purify us, right? One of the ways he does it is he allows the testing. In the Lord's Prayer, it says, lead us not into temptation, because it's actually not his will to lead us into temptation. But he allows it because there are angels that have the authority to test us, and he doesn't take back the gifts that he gives us. So you can use them for good, you can use them for evil, you still get to keep your gifts. So he has decided that he will then use the testing to grow us and to expand us. Because the more expansive we get, the greater his expression, right? So when we don't try new things, when we don't push the boundaries on our emotions, we don't start telling ourselves what to think, he doesn't get the greatest expression. right? And when you think about it, every little step that you take along those few things that I mentioned is a testimony. And it's when we continue to have testimonies, I mean, that's really what we should be doing all day long, right? Is just talking about how good God is. And the way we know it is because he shows up, right? And we've got these little, it doesn't have to be this crazy, like, I was saved and slain in the spirit, and, you know, it can just be like, this is what he did. Like, I didn't have a way, and then I did. Whatever, you know, I needed money for X, and it just came through. It was in my bank account. So really having those testimonies and making sure that we are aligning ourselves with his goodness, and that he will constantly chase us all the days of our lives with his goodness and mercy, because that's who he is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.